Hi! In this tutorial we will have a look at some differences and similarities between Resolve and Scratch. This video is primarily meant for Resolve users who wish to take a closer look at Scratch. Before continuing, I do encourage you to first have a look at our Scratch 101 video, if you have not done this already, to understand the basics of Scratch. This video will touch upon various subjects to easier understand the concept and functions of Scratch if your primary experience is with Resolve. We'll start out with explaining the basic concept difference in philosophy behind the software. And next, we'll look at the difference of some more practical tasks, like the primary layer, secondary grading layers, and controls in Scratch in general, how to create a canvas and animate or track it, how to use the keyer inside Scratch, how to use versions and the gallery, how to composite two shots onto each other and adding external mattes, and how to create an output and render your work. Okay, let's do a quick recap on the different modules and the UI of Scratch. There, where Resolve is kind of built up around a series of sequential steps, typical for a post job, Scratch makes a clear distinction between data management and its creative tools. The construct is made to manage all your media. This is where you load footage, create conforms, and build up your output pipeline. The player module, on the other hand, contains all the creative toolsets for working with a timeline, grades, looks, and complete composites. Another distinctive feature is that the Scratch interface is what we call image-centric, meaning that it reserves as much space as possible for the actual image, also on the primary monitor, rather than exposing as many controls as possible, which you can see in the player where the larger portion of the screen is reserved for the image. Also, the Scratch interface is optimized for drag and drop and minimizes the need for right-clicks, making it better suitable to work fast with a pen or stylus. Note that Scratch also supports a wide range of third-party grading panels, which you can use with the provided mappings, but also create your own. So, as said, Scratch basically has two departments, the construct and the player. Once entering a project, you will be inside the construct. The player, in turn, has three toolsets. The player menu, which you can use to just play back your footage or play out to a deck. The edit menu, which lets you edit your footage, add or modify dissolves, and also sync audio. Last but not least, there's the matrix menu, in which you do your grading and also compositing. Today, we will spend most of our time in this particular module. So let's start right away. I have prepared a construct with a couple of shots in it, which we enter into the player with. Right-click to switch to the matrix. On a side note, this is the only right-click menu you will find inside Scratch, and it only has the purpose of switching between the different modules if you don't want to use the F keys on your keyboard to do so. Here, either swipe left and right, or click the corresponding buttons on the top menu bar to bring up your versions and layers menu. By the way, clicking the statistics button brings up the signal measuring tools, such as waveforms, histogram, and vector scope. Where in Resolve, you're being used to handle nodes, in Scratch you will be handling layers, which can easily be switched on and off, and also pretty quickly moved around in order. Same as a node in Resolve, a layer in Scratch can contain any or all of the tools available here, such as the color wheels, keyers, curves, and canvas or masks. Please note, Scratch Lab does not have multiple layers. It only features the primary layer for grading, whereas Scratch Finish features the full toolset I'm showing here. If you do not create any kind of layer, you will be working on the primary layer. On a shot without a grade, the primary layer is hidden, simply because there is no need to display a layer if it's the only one on the shot. If you add layers to your grade, the primary layer gets displayed in the list. Note, the layers are being stacked from top to bottom, with the primary layer being the base layer. Let's create a greenish look on the primary layer. And now, add a good amount of red on layer 1. All layers, except for the primary layer, can be chosen to be recursive or non-recursive. If set to recursive, they will behave as most people would expect them. Take the previous layer as input to grade from the current state onwards. By clicking the R of the corresponding layer, you can set this layer to be non-recursive and so take the grading from the primary layer as input for this particular layer. So everything in this layer will not take into account what's done on all the layers between the two. In this case, layer 1. On a side note, you can quickly duplicate layers by holding down Alt and dragging them. And also group several layers into one group. Selecting a layer and clicking the Reset button on the far right, you can reset this single layer. Selecting the primary layer and hitting the Reset button will reset the complete shot and delete all existing layers. Lastly, let's have a look at the controls inside the matrix. In Resolve, altering a numeric control is done by clicking and dragging to the left or right. That works well, but, of course, is limited to the space right and left to the value being altered. If your cursor reaches the end of the screen, you have to release the button, go back to the control and drag it again. The fastest way to alter numeric controls in Scratch is to click and dial around the value to increase or decrease it. You can do that more sensitive if holding down the Shift button whilst circling. This just behaves like moving an encoder on your panel. Another way to alter numeric values in Scratch is to simply click the value and enter a new one into the calculator panel that pops up. On a side note, whilst Resolve is better controlled with a mouse, I would recommend to drive Scratch with pen and tablet, but of course a mouse works good as well. The color menu got a special treatment for those who don't have a nice grading panel at hand. Of course, you can alter lift, gamma and gain by just clicking and dragging either the luminance ring or the color balls to the desired direction, just like in Resolve. But let's be honest, working this way would make you pull out your hair rather sooner than later. So, for those who don't have a panel at hand, you can grade much faster by holding down the JKL keys to activate either one of the tools and now click and drag across the image to get the desired result. This really speeds up working without a proper grading panel, especially when working with pen and tablet. Okay, so let's start with a fresh image, create a layer, and quickly draw a shape by going to the Canvas menu. You can either select one of the predefined shapes here, or draw a freehand shape. On a side note, the Canvas menu also features a real-time bicubic function which you can use to warp your image if needed. But for now, we will stick to a normal freehand shape. Once closed, you can add softness to that shape and do your grading. Let's quickly light this up a little bit. As you can see, our grading is limited to what's inside the canvas. We can also invert the canvas to affect everything that's outside. Now, scrubbing through that clip, we can see the content moving, so we need to move our canvas as well. If we are to animate our canvas by hand, we can simply do that by using the animation controls on the far right. If set to manual, we can create keyframes each time we click the Set Keyframe button. However, when activating the Auto button, Scratch will set a keyframe every time we have altered any of the parameters. So let's go ahead and place our canvas where we want to have it. Looking at the mini timeline, you can see that Scratch has created a keyframe for us. Now let's go a bit forward and place our canvas accordingly. Note that Scratch also features a comprehensive spline editor which we can bring up by clicking the Animate button. Or we can drag the Animate button towards the parameter we want to have displayed or animate to let Scratch instantly show us the animation curve of that particular parameter. In this case, the x-axis animation. On the far left, we can activate other animation channels to be displayed, such as the y-axis animation. We can either alter single keyframes or multiple keyframes by holding down Ctrl and dragging a rectangle around every keyframe we want to manipulate. If I just want to change the x-axis, I can just deactivate the y-axis on the left. By selecting the corresponding buttons on the right, we can add or delete keyframes from our animation. Also, I want to draw your attention to the so-called global mode, which gives you these bars on the x and y axis of the editor. Using these, you can very quickly either move or stretch your animation in either time or value. A much more comfortable way is to track the canvas, of course. Let me reset our animation and enter the tracking menu. In Resolve, there's only one tracker, the 3D tracker. Scratch lets you choose between different types of trackers, some of them faster, some of them more accurate. There's a 1-point, 2-point, and also a shape tracker, which functions quite similar to the 3D tracker known from Resolve. For this example, the 2-point tracker is good to go. I will just place the 2 tracker boxes where I need them to be. Next, I can select the transforms I want Scratch to apply to my shape. In this case, I'm going to disable scale because I want the shape to stay the same size all the time. Then, similar to Resolve, simply click the direction you want Scratch to track to and watch Scratch creating a highly customizable animation curve for our shape. Click again to stop it and confirm the track when exiting the menu. Let's have a look at the animation menu and display X and Y animation channels. In a difference to Resolve, the tracking data Scratch created can be modified instantly without the need of setting additional keyframes. As we can see, our canvas itself is tracked well, but a little bit off. To adjust this, we could for instance use the global mode to align it properly on X and Y axis for the whole track. But let me show you a much quicker way to do this. Back to the canvas menu. Simply grab the shape, put it in place, and make sure the All button down here is active. Now simply hit the Trim key button and Scratch will offset the complete animation channels of the shape for us. Done. Couldn't be easier. Of course, we can still enter the animation menu and alter each of those keyframes individually. Let's create another layer and switch to the qualifier menu. First, we can select the qualifier type. Scratch offers quite a range of different keys, suitable for different situations. Let's use the HSV key, which is similar to the HSL key in Resolve. Next, we can choose if we want to key from the original source image, the primary layer, or recursive from the current image we can see in our viewport. This opens up a variety of keying possibilities. Then simply pick a color from the viewport. Scratch will show you instantly what you're keying, but you can turn that off or switch to a black and white view of your mat. To refine your key, you can use the controls below. Note that you can alter the numeric values on the left and right, just like you're used to from Resolve. But a more intuitive way is to click and drag the range and softness sliders here. After we are confident with our key, we can then expand, shrink, or blur our mat. Let's quickly put a grade on it. Talking about mats, I want to draw your attention to the Curves menu. Just like you're used to from Resolve, here you will find all kinds of curves, like the luminance curves for each channel, the hue versus saturation, and hue versus hue curves, and the likes. Looking closely, you will find an alpha curve, which applies to the alpha channel of the selected layer and lets us take care of our matte in greater detail. Of course, we can also limit our matte by drawing a canvas. Alright, let's have a brief look at versions and galleries. Both exist in Scratch as well as in Resolve, but in slightly different ways. In Resolve, you can have multiple versions of a grading of a shot and switch them through by right-clicking onto a thumbnail and loading the grading. Scratch has a more visual approach of managing versions. Swipe to the right to bring up the versions panel. Let's simply turn this shot blue, then hit the Add Version button on the right. This simply duplicates the shot together with the grading on it. So now we can continue our grading. For example, by adding more contrast to the image. Again, add another version. Also, we can reset the whole thing and start all over. Maybe give it a more reddish look. This way we can quickly see how many versions we have per shot and what they look like. Note that due to performance reasons, only the grading done on the primary layer is being shown in those thumbnails. We can quickly switch through the various versions of our grading, even whilst the clip is playing back. In fact, almost anything in Scratch can be done whilst the clip is playing. An important point about the versions is that the most bottom version will be the one that gets considered when it comes to rendering out our timeline. So if you want to have the blue look rendered out, just select it and drop it down below. Let's go back to the construct for a moment. As you can see, we also can manage our versions from here and simply put the more contrasty look at the bottom to be rendered out. Now what if we need to store and recall our grades? In Resolve, you are using stills and power grades to save your gradings and applying them by right-clicking and selecting Apply or Append Grade. Scratch is not so much different here. Let's say we want to save this grade with all its layers. Click on the Tray button to open up the same. You will notice the two tabs here, Project and Gallery. Grades stored in Project are actually shot references and so will be only available in this particular project. If they are stored inside the gallery, they will be available globally and be saved with your user. Also, you can synchronize the gallery online with your Assimilate account and so have access to it at any time, at any place, on any Scratch system. On both tabs, we can create multiple folders to store our grades in. Here I have an existing one with already a few grades in it. To add the current grade, simply hit the Add button and the grade will show up here. So this behaves quite similar to the stills and power grades known from Resolve. Note that you can also drag and drop grades into the tray from the construct. Now for recalling a grade. Let's move on to the next shot. Before applying a grade to this shot, maybe we first want to preview the look to see if it fits. Therefore, we can just hit the Preview button down here. Switch through all stored grades to find the one that we think is appropriate. Next, we can turn off Preview and hit the Apply button to put the grade onto our shot. Clicking the little arrow beside the Apply button, we can tell Scratch to only copy certain parts of the grade or leave out one or more parameters. If I select the Add Layers option, Scratch will not replace, but rather append the grading onto the shot in addition to the already existing grade. Scratch offers another way to quickly apply often used grades. Let's open up the memory banks. We can simply drag and drop grades from the tray into one of the memory banks. Or, by shift-clicking the slot, you can add the current grade. You can recall the grade by simply clicking the memory bank. Note that these 8 slots are also mappable to your panel. It is important to know that Scratch will use these settings in the Paste menu to apply the grade. So if we have the Add Layers button enabled, Scratch will always add the grading to the existing one and not replace it. Same goes for all other options in this menu. For example, if I do not want to copy over any framing of the saved grade, I just deselect it here, and when applying the grade, framing will not be copied with it. If we were to composite two images on top of each other, for instance a green screen scene, we would create a second video track in Resolve, place the clip there and key it. We could do the same with Scratch by going into the Edit menu and insert the second clip there, but there's a much easier and more elegant way to do this. Before continuing, I want to introduce you to the staging area in Scratch. The staging area functions as a magazine of elements for a particular shot if you want. Simply put everything you need to build up the shot in the staging slot of the corresponding shot. Of course, we could also place our elements, such as this wizard, witch and leaves, as clips or versions into our construct. But of course, we don't want these clips to be considered as either versions or clips. We just need them to build up another clip. That's why we just place them here into the staging slot of this particular shot. This way we can keep our construct nice and tidy. Now for the compositing. Let's enter into the matrix. Here we have our base shot, which is the background for our composite. And we need to add the various other elements to it. To have them displayed, swipe to the right and switch from the Versions menu to the Staging menu to have our compositing elements at hand. Note that in Scratch, a grading layer can also be a texture layer. So let's simply add a layer here and go to the Texture menu. The Texture menu gives us the option to feed the current layer with a different image, or a different matte, or both. We can click the Fetch button to fetch a shot from anywhere in our project and drop it here. But as we have our compositing elements neatly arranged inside the staging area, we'll grab them from there. Simply click and drop it into the front field here. Switching the layer on and off, you can see that this is now simply one image on top of another. Let's go to the Qualifier menu to key the green content of the image. Voila! Of course, we can now optimize our key with the various tools we have inside the matrix, and also grade the image, but I will leave it at that for now. Let's move on to another shot. Here we need to comp the animated smoke on top of the chimney. Again, we have all compositing elements arranged in the staging area of the slot. In this case, we don't need to key the smoke because we have an alpha provided from the VFX department. Let's first add the front image to our shot. Note that you can also just drag and drop the image into the viewport if the corresponding setting in the gearing menu here is enabled. This way, Scratch creates a layer with that image automatically, as you can see here. Looking at the Texture menu, the front field of the layer is filled with the image we just dropped into the viewport. Now we just need to add the external matte. In Resolve, we would mark it as a matte clip in the Media panel and then add it to our node graph via right-click. In Scratch, this actually works the same way in which we apply an image to a layer. To add the provided alpha, just grab it and drop it here into the matte field below the front field. Now we just need to select a channel to pull the matte from, and that's basically it. Also, we have several options available to manipulate the inserted matte, such as transforms and directional blurs. We can now scale and position the smoke on top of the chimney. Let's quickly finish this comp. What I want to do is to soften the bottom of the smoke animation to make it look more realistic. Therefore, I create a new layer and draw a freehand shape around the area. To have an effect, I set this layer to be non-recursive, and so take the primary layer as input for this particular layer. This way, I'm kind of cutting a hole through the smoke. Now if we scrub through the timeline, we see that we need to track the two layers we just created. Of course, we could now track both of those layers individually, but let me show you a much quicker and more elegant way to achieve what we are after. Simply Ctrl-select both layers and hit the group button at the bottom of the layer stack. So now, instead of tracking each layer individually, I can simply track the group which contains the layers. Okay, let's enter into the tracking menu. Select the one-point tracker, position it on top of the chimney and track forward. Let's go back to finish the track into the other direction. Done. Going back to the canvas menu, we can now offset the track via the trim key button and grade the smoke. Let me bring up the waveforms to better see what I'm doing here. Let's give the smoke a rather bluish look. As you can see, although we're working on red 4K material, with activated scopes, I can still grade in real time whilst the clip is playing back. On a side note, I'm using Scratch on a MacBook Pro here, which deburrs the red clip, processes the grading, and displays the scopes all on a single mobile GPU. Alright, let's assume we are done with our grading and want to get everything out of Scratch. As said earlier, the construct is the area where the non-creative tasks take place. In Resolve, we would select the timeline we want to output, select the Deliver menu, set up our parameters, and add the timeline to the export list. In Scratch, the Deliver menu is simply the output button right inside the construct. In this view, we can see the output structure of our construct. At the moment, it consists of the main output node, which by the way defines our timeline in terms of resolution, aspect and frame rate. I have saved a template of outputs, which I'm going to load now. Since you are already familiar with node-based environments from Resolve, this will be a very easy task. Imagine the complete timeline that we have is being piped through these nodes. Every output node is different from each other. This one is set to render HD DPX, while this one will render a preview H.264 in a much smaller resolution. Here we have a node which contains a burn-in and then gets piped into an MXF output to deliver for Avid, and so on. I can always add new output nodes and rename those if I want. On a side note, you can enter the player with all its creative tools with any of these outputs. This means entering the player with the timeline being treated as one single clip. Imagine this as being a grading put over the complete timeline. However, let's assume I want to render out an H.264 file of the complete movie. Just select that output and click right here to determine the target file name. In a difference to Resolve, the target file name is being made up of several metadata tokens you can add to it. By default, the target file name is the name of the output node. Since H.264 output is not the name I want to give it, I can simply delete the token and add a new one, such as the construct's name. Or type in anything I want, or a combo out of both. Let's add a suffix by just adding an underscore and calling this v1. Click OK and add the output to the render queue by clicking the corresponding button with the output node selected. Let's have a look at our MXF output node. Since this output node is meant to provide dailies for editing in Avid, I need to tell Scratch to render single clips instead of one big file. In Resolve, this is done by clicking a checkbox telling Resolve to output single clips. In Scratch, this is being determined by the output file name I can create with the tokens mentioned earlier. To do this, I simply need to insert a token which has a different content from shot to shot, such as source file name for instance. If Scratch now proceeds rendering from one shot to the next, it is forced to create a new file, since the source file name changes from clip to clip, and therefore the output file name does as well. Scratch will now render single clips, with the target file name consisting out of the source file name. We can always preview what the file name will look like here. Note that we can also build up a combination consisting of multiple tokens. Once done, you can save your output file naming as a preset, or click OK to get back to the output tree. Let's add this output to the render queue as well. Enter the render queue and hit the Start button, just like we are being used to from Resolve. Scratch can now render in the background while we can move on to the next construct and continue working. This concludes the transition tutorial for Resolve users. I hope it was useful to you, and see you next time.